Right now, I'm in Little Missouri, Fort Abraham Lincoln, Beaver Lake, Rams Island, Pembina Gorge, Lewis and Clark State Park. And in one week, I visited every single state park in North Dakota. All 14 of them. My quest to visit all the state parks in the US had brought me to North Dakota. Mostly because it borders Montana and I'm knocking all those ones out first, so yeah. Many would be quick to dismiss North Dakota as an endless expanse of prairie, but I was excited to see what hidden gems I could find in the Rough Rider state. I hope you're interested in seeing what North Dakota has to offer as well. This is Goshen Man, the North Dakota State Parks. Laying down some ground rules, first I only visited state parks, nothing else in the state park system, like state recreation areas, for example. I will admit I did travel to North Dakota a little too early since spring hadn't quite started yet, and most of the trees didn't have leaves, so I am doing North Dakota a little dirty here. Also, before I visited any of the state parks, I stopped at Theodore Roosevelt National Park since I was starting in the west and going east for the most part. Was this the sightseeing equivalent of eating dessert before vegetables? We shall see. Now, with all that out of the way, let's get into the experience and later, the ranking. The state park I start out with is Rough Rider, which is also the only one I had visited before, although then it was called Sully Creek and it actually changed its name within the past year, although the signs haven't quite updated. It was changed since the park was expanding with, new campsites and they're doing a little remodel, and a General Alfred Sully who was named after killed a lot of Sioux people in the area. So it was changed to honor Theodore Roosevelt and the Rough Riders, which of course the main feature is the massive cliff to the north and other surrounding Badlands features. There's camping, and specifically camping for people with horses. What I hadn't checked out last year was the Madahay Trail, which as it turns out is part of a larger trail running through the state. However, the park only contains a small portion of the trail, so I was wondering how far I should go on it since most of it's not in the state park, but it does have access for it. So it's does this count as part of the state park, But then there was a clear answer as to where to stop. So it's time to move on. One might wonder how I stay sane driving through the prairie, but there's so much to see, like oil fields, big power stations, oil fields, and hills that they call oil fields. Oil fields. The next park is Little Missouri, named after the river known as the Little Missouri. The river carved out these Badlands features that we can see here on approach. The first thing I stopped at here was the scenic overlook of the park. Once again, this has camping and horse camping. There's also a huge amount of trails. The first trail I saw had the gate closed, so I moved on. The trails opened on May 1st and it was May 2nd, so what are we doing? Come on. This park is kind of on private land. Most trails are on private property but are leased by the Parks Department, so does it count as part of the park? Yeah, sure. Eventually I did reach a forest which felt somewhat ominous, as the trail wasn't exactly well maintained, but I love an ill-defined trail, although this will be hell to hike back up. Throughout the trail, I noticed large footprints in the dirt that looked like human toes, which means that someone was hitting the trail with the dogs out, or Bigfoot is here. Everyone's been searching in the Pacific Northwest or Maine when Bigfoot is actually in North Dakota. Now, I wouldn't be the first to suggest Bigfoot is in North Dakota, and I won't be the last. He's out there, guys. He's in Little Missouri State Park, North Dakota. As I kept hiking, I got more views of the Badlands. The classic North Dakota State Parks experience is looking in the distance and seeing an oil pump. The trails had become less obvious, and I wasn't entirely sure if I was even on official trails at this point, but at least I had my reliable oil pumps to guide me. Now, as you saw earlier, the trail was pretty poorly maintained, and this doesn't really bother me that much, but once I, was checking the map, and looking at the trail markers were not lining up. My only point of reference that I knew for sure where I was because I encountered this gate. Gotta say, very useless gate. I got under here very easily. But I guess I would stop horses and stuff. But here's the path it says I would have taken to get here, and here's what I believe I took. So yeah, the map was just kind of wrong. So I continued and I walked up this trail, but it seemed to be taking me back up. And I didn't know where it was gonna take me, so I turned around. I'm just gonna take the way back up that I already know how to get to. At some point, I looked down and noticed my legs were covered in ticks. Now, before this, I had seen one tick in my lifetime, so my experience with ticks increased at least tenfold in that moment. Either that grassy area had so many more ticks, or more horrifying and likely, is that they had been on me for a while, and I hadn't noticed since I don't scan my legs for ticks. Thankfully, none of them had burrowed in. Apparently it takes a little while for that to happen, but also, Lyme disease apparently takes a while to appear, so leave a like for possible Lyme disease. As I predicted earlier, it was indeed hell to hike back up. The forest, which had seemed ominous during the ascent, provided great relief from both the sun and ticks. Now, after hiking for 2 hours, being sunburned and covered in ticks, you wouldn't think I would want to continue, but There was another trailhead and I had to see what was up. This sign seemed super cryptic, but it's just the trail names. Probably should have started here, but oh well. Went and looked at a couple of vantage points just to get some more views. Very lovely scenery here. Honestly, North Dakota has kind of a strong start. Apparently there's trails down to the river, but I did not have the time to go and find that out, and also considering how well marked the trails on the other side were, imagine that area looks somewhat like this. Ignore the construction sign. Or maybe don't. I don't know what's down there. Also, as mentioned earlier, this place was swarming with ticks, and I kept finding them in my car for the rest of North Dakota. I don't know if they were from here or later parks, but I did become hyper aware of them. One tick crawled onto the roof and tried to drop down onto me, so that was fun. Not the kind of thing you want to see when driving down the highway. The key to driving through the prairie is to enter a fugue state where time isn't real and 30 minutes and 3 hours are indistinguishable. After some amount of time, upgrading from Little Missouri to regular Missouri with Lewis and Clark State Park, named after the two guys who passed through here that one time. Anyways, one of them got shot here, so I guess there's that. I'm sure I'm not the only one who had to repeatedly learn about Lewis and Clark in school. Probably pretty common in the states they pass through, but if you don't know, here's a summary. They led an expedition from St. Louis to Pacific and documented stuff. Now this park is the first located on Lake Sakakawea, which is named after the Shoshone woman who was their guide, and probably the reason they didn't all die. It's one of the largest man-made lakes in the US, and is the 12th largest in the US by surface area. I say all this to pad out some time, since there's not a lot here. There's a boat ramp somewhere, and camping, and some day use as well, some trails along the lake between the picnic areas. The scenery is here. One of these colorblind things that had fallen over, and I was like, oh boy, I can't believe they get to experience a void of blue and tan. Then I remembered that yellow-blue colorblindness is one of the main ones, so actually does kind of make sense. There's also a really nice long beach here, so there's that. Kind of neat. I will not succumb to prairie madness. I will not succumb to prairie madness. I will not succumb to prairie madness. What an ominous fire in the distance. Now, Lake Sakakawea might not look that big, but I have been driving for over 2 hours, mostly east, and we are still on the shores of Lake Sakakawea. It's Fort Stevenson State Park. I know that's almost dark. I was quite behind schedule. I was not expecting Little Missouri to take that long. Now, even though this park is also on Lake Sakakawea, it has a little more going on, like this replica of Fort Stevenson. The original is underwater. When they dammed up the Missouri to make Lake Sakakawea, it does have a little visitor center in it, but you know, it was closed by the time I got there. And I'm probably not missing too much, just a little tidbits about the history of the fort. You're not here for a history lesson, or maybe you are, in which case, oops. Of course, the park has your standard reservoir activities, boating, camping, fishing. In fact, at the same time, I'll say every state park in North Dakota has camping. So from here on out, they all got camping, except for one, and I'll make mention of that. Now, there's also day use beaches, and they have this cool layered pattern in the rocks. It's very nice looking. Once again, trails around, but this time they pass through some forests, so a little more interesting. There's also this prairie dog town, but I'm assuming they're all asleep, so here's some footage of some other prairie dogs I saw, and imagine they're right there. Of course, there are views of Lake Sakakawea, and we can even see the next state park from here. The third and final state park on Lake Sakakawea is also eponymous with the lake. Does that word make grammatical sense there? I don't know. I also got here late and slept in my car, because, yeah. When I awoke, you could see that this park was truly empty. Ain't no one camping here this time of year, although there were some boats in the marina, so that part was still kind of active. Now, once again, we got views of Lake Sakakawea. Similar beaches as the last park, but the patterns weren't quite as intense. Unique views here are the Garrison Dam, and as mentioned in the last park, we can look across the lake and see Fort Stevenson State Park. Yeah, there's some day use areas and trails between camping and picnic areas, but none too special. Not a lot of tree cover here, so it's pretty sparse. It's got the usual lake activities, and yep. Oh yeah, there's a visitor center, but it hadn't opened yet, so I probably didn't miss much going on there. I just had some, like, lake facts. I don't know. Before visiting the next state park, though, I stopped at the Scientific Center of North America. Continuing along the Missouri for the next park, Cross Ranch. It had a self-guided trail which seemed to be someone's Eagle Scout project. It was a nice little hike through the riparian forest. You get some nice views of the Missouri River as well, and some different drier forests, as well as some bat boxes. This trail loops around most of the campsite. It's just a pretty standard nature trail. Not a lot to say about it. There was also a visitor center. I don't stress about not visiting all the visitor centers since most of them have pretty similar information about, you know, the wildlife, ecology, and history of the region. This park actually has a second area with a boat ramp, and yeah, this one didn't seem as nice. A lot drier, but yeah, there's a boat ramp and more camping over here, and there's actually a trail between the two, but I was good on tick-infested trails and being exposed to the sun for now. Lewis and Clark couldn't spell for though. And I continue to not succumb to prairie madness. Moving south and still on the Missouri River, I didn't intend to visit all the Missouri River parks in a row, it's just a neat coincidence. I've arrived at Fort Abraham Lincoln, and dang, they shaved him. Fun fact, this was the only park that had someone attending the gate, and I actually used my parks pass. This was also the busiest park I went into in North Dakota, probably due to its proximity to Bismarck and it being Saturday. I started with the visitor center, which was the most robust one I had seen so far. The main room focused on the Mandan tribe and talked about Honest Land Village, or in Mandan, Midiba-wa-esh, which we'll see in a bit. The other room talked about the history of Fort Abraham Lincoln, which of course we'll also see more of later. I was also tempted to put these clothes on, but like they didn't say explicitly you could, so I'm like, I'm not gonna do that. Also get lice in addition to ticks. Now, just outside the visitor center, across this cool little bridge, is the Honest Land Village, which is a replica of a 400-year-old Mandan village, and is an example of many that span the Missouri. I didn't know the Mandan had access to modern garage doors, though. These buildings were pretty neat, and most of them were open and allowed to be wandered through. Inside each were like, different tidbits of information, and they felt much larger inside than they looked outside. They were also quite cool compared to the temperature outside, and I assume they maintain a relatively consistent temperature throughout the year, making them good for winter too. Because, that can get brutal in the Dakotas as well. There are also a few trails around the riparian forest, near the river where the campground was situated. On the way down, there was a stop for the Fort Abraham Lincoln trolley, and it said the next departure was in about 10 minutes, so I waited to see if it would actually arrive. Sure, I could have looked it up, but that's not as much fun. It did not arrive. I checked later, and from what I can tell, they stopped running it since the people who did retired. There's some trails along the Missouri where the North Dakota Capitol building looms ever present. Yes, that's what North Dakota's capital looks like. Moving on to the top of the hill, which contains a couple of lookout towers, one of which was occupied by a wedding party. There are also other remains of the fort and descriptions for where each one was. This hill also offers views of Bismarck and the surrounding area. Sure, it's not the greatest view of all time, but it is an expansive view, and those I am a fan of. There were quite a few trails in this area as well, but my skin was already becoming jerky, so I moved on. Apparently I missed out on a cemetery. I ended off with the main intact fort complex. This door was unlocked, and when I peeked inside, they were setting stuff up for a wedding reception, and I was like, ooh, shouldn't be in there. I don't think anyone saw me, and every other door I tried on the other buildings was locked. There's definitely stuff set up in the others, but maybe that's only for like guided tours, or maybe I was just like too early in the season. This section also had the Custer House. This is where his army set off before being defeated at the Battle of Little Bighorn. And to summarize, the whole reason for this fort's existence, manifest destiny. I'm torn on whether I should go more in depth on the historical places, or if it's just like, yeah, I don't know, I don't want this to be like a history lecture. I want to cover, what do you see at the park? What can you learn? You can learn about Custer and his army. Not about how they lost at Little Bighorn, that's in Montana though. But still, full-blown house at a fort feels wild to me. I spent more time here than I expected, but I had to get going. Moving southeast, I was approaching the next park on these gravel county roads, and I thought, surely there's a better way. There was. Thanks Google Maps, it was technically the quickest. Welcome to Beaver Lake State Park. This park is indeed situated on a lake. This park had a little grove, I guess you could call it, right on the lake. It's not riverine forest, but it is riparian again. It was a nice little reprieve from the surrounding prairie, but other than that, this park was pretty standard. Boating, camping, fishing, some trails around, one venturing into the prairie. You can get a little bit more of a lookout of the whole Beaver Lake, and you can see it's like, yeah, it's just kind of there. Although it did have this rock sign that said, "Welcome to State Park," which I was tempted to make the thumbnail, but it's too illegible at ground level, I'd say. There was also this rock monument thing in like the Grove area, and Bell. So you know what, it earns imaginary bonus points for having some random decoration. There was also a swimming area somewhere around, and just gonna mention it again, but this little grove had a pleasant vibe. The grass had ticks in it as well. I'm not gonna hold that against most parks, because you can't really control that. Thought I'd mention it. The drive to the next park, though, is the longest between parks on my route, so I'd be crossing basically the entirety of North Dakota from south to north. Something about the sunset made it easier to enter the Zen driving state. That's probably a better term than fugue state. This seems like a good time to mention that I had an article written about my state park escapades, so that's pretty cool. After a long drive, I arrived at Lake Metagoshi State Park, where a street lamp was directly above my campsite. Apparently it's pronounced Metagoshi in America and Metagosh in Canada, at least according to the one thing I found on how to pronounce it. Now here's where I really messed up by coming before trees got their leaves, because this is a full-blown forest. This park is all forest. It's not like, oh, some riparian forest on the prairie. No, this is just a birch forest. Since this is basically Manitoba, and I've been to Manitoba, so imagine it looks like this. When I say this park is basically Manitoba, that's Canada, right over there. Those people's lawns are on the other side of the border. That's Manitoba. To be clear, I did not cross the border into Canada. Not because of legal stuff or whatever, I just didn't want to be in someone's backyard. It feels awkward. Anyways, to stay on topic, this park had more than just the titular Lake Metagoshi. There's also a school section, which had this small island connected by bridge. Yeah, this park is mostly just trails through forests and overlooking the lakes, and of course there's all the water-based stuff you can do. Apparently it's especially popular with, canoes and kayaks. More of a small boat type of state park. Out of all the state parks, this might be the one I would want to return to in the summer just to kind of see what the vibe is. Now, there are some pros to arriving before the trees get their leaves, like it's easier to see birds. There are less crowds and bugs. I say bugs including all insects and adjacent species like arachnids. But there are still some invertebrates, like one of my new least favorite creatures, spiders that cross the paths with one strand of silk between the bushes that you can feel on your body when you walk through it, but you can't get it off you because it's so fine and thin, but you can still feel it kind of sticking to you. However, I also had one of the best animal encounters here on this trip with this little turtle. I had to scare it out of the road. For a second I thought I saw a fox scampering through the woods, but alas, nah. Now, the cons are, of course, the lack of leaves, so there's less shade, because it's still about 80 degrees Fahrenheit out. And then also, of course, no leaves just doesn't look as good, and there's not even snow on the ground. This looks like November, but it feels like hot September, if that makes sense. Also, all the facilities showers are closed, so yeah, cool. For the moment, I don't have to worry about prairie madness, now I have to worry about forest madness. Also stopped at the wheel turtle, get it? It's because it's made of wheels, and those are the Turtle Mountains. I think North Dakota might need to relax a little when calling things mountains. Not trying to gatekeep, actually I am, though those aren't mountains. I'm sure you're wondering what it looks like inside the turtle. Bad. Okay, back to trying not to drive myself mad. Second center of North America visited on this trip in Rugby, North Dakota. Okay, back to trying not to drive myself mad. The next park is Graham's Island on Devil's Lake. The main attraction here was fishing. Maybe the fishing here is great, I don't know. I'm just visiting all these parks as a regular Joe. There's some trails here and you can see the lake, there's some marinas somewhere, but I don't visit those as, I don't have a boat. On one of the trails there is this deer decoy, I guess some kind of hunting practice, as well as a giant cobra? I don't get it. There's also a beach area, and I will say that this lake does feel more grand than Sakakawea. Just kind of its general shape lets you see across more of it. Although that's not saying much, and you can still see the other side, and it's just dead trees. There's lots of trees here though, which is nice because the drive here looked like this. So it's a nice little pocket on the lake that they chose for the state park. And then I passed through the town of Devil's Lake, and I gotta say it's a fitting name since it felt like hell. It was 83 degrees out in May and there was wind blowing, but it wasn't a nice breeze, it was a vindictive wind that was trying to knock me down. How the f do people live here? I bet hell freezes over too in the winter with 40-mile-an-hour winds and so flat and every town feels like someone's playing a game where they need to build more houses, so they just throw some houses down on the edge of town and draw a road out with no consideration for any pre-existing layout. Also, I don't know if I've seen it downtown yet. I feel like every road just bypasses them. Also, it's so flat. I will not succumb to prairie madness. Also, there's this ominous pyramid in the middle of nowhere. After driving through maybe the most desolate part of North Dakota, the terrain suddenly shifted to this hilly forest because I had finally reached the Pembina Gorge, and it's home to North Dakota's most recent state park, Pembina Gorge State Park, as until last year it was a state recreation area, and once again the sign hadn't been updated, and it definitely shows that it has not quite fully evolved into state park yet. This is the only state park without camping, and the only facilities are one vault toilet. The trailhead is on top of the gorge and overlooks one of the largest forests in North Dakota. There's also this little grassy patch at the top of it with a small trail. Now, as I descended into the gorge, I will share this place is massive. The one trail I took about 45 minutes, and it took me here when there's all of this. The gorge itself was carved out by the Pembina River and took millions of years to do, with glacial runoff helping in the process. The park has many trails throughout the gorge's expansive forest, and the Pembina River flows through the gorge, and part of it might be part of the park. I can't quite tell. There's not exact boundaries shown on the map. It doesn't really seem like there's an access point to the river in the park. There's just kind of like this road. The park also seems to care more towards like mountain biking and off-terrain vehicles rather than just hiking. Also, I think horses as well. Now, as mentioned earlier, this park was a recreation area until last year, and they're probably planning on expanding it and giving it like campsite and some more facilities. Moving along to the east for Icelandic State Park. Now, this park gets its name from the settlers from Iceland and other Nordic countries, but it's also in an area forged by glaciers, which are a common feature of Iceland, so kind of a little double meaning there, but it's mostly the settlers. Many lakes in this region are remnants of long receded glaciers from ice ages past. Now, this one had a visitor center covering the geology up until the modern history of Pembina County, featuring one of the maps of all time. You would think Icelandic State Park would at least get Iceland right, but somehow tipped it on its side. You gotta love a museum exhibit that looks like it was made as a project for a middle schooler. Also, something about this statement feels off, but I can't quite find the exact reason. The future. There's also a bunch of buildings on the grounds, like this church and a schoolhouse. I'm assuming that they're replicas and they haven't been here since the first European settlers, but still kind of a neat little thing they've got. And of course, there's a bunch of trails to access the riparian forest. I don't know what else there is to say about riparian forest. Also, I don't think I've explained riparian forest yet. They're forests along a body of water. There was also this pine forest, which felt weirdly western to me. There was also a small lake here with a beach perfect for small lake activities. The Pembina County Museum is also located within the boundaries of the park, but it didn't open until 1 and hasn't sticking around for that. But it does have some more replica buildings, and I honestly can't imagine what information it would have different from the other visitor center, because the other visitor center was pretty thorough. Then I passed by a town called Mountain, and North Dakota is really getting out of hand with the mountain calls. I will not succumb to prairie madness. I will not succumb to prairie madness. I will not succumb to prairie madness. The next park is Turtle River. It's located along Turtle River. It has a hill. Imagine if I left it there. I mean, what's there to say at this point? It's got the river running through, it's got trails through the riparian forest, and some that pass through the prairie, and some near wetlands. Some of these trails provide nice views overlooking the park. I mean, yeah, they are nice views. There's some lodges and nice areas along the river, and camping, and a trail with plaques, and a closed visitor center, but the vestibule's open and it smells weird. It's nice, but there's not a lot that makes it stand out. Keep wondering if I would feel this way if the trees have leaves, but even if they did make them feel nicer, I think they would all still feel very similar. The few areas of North Dakota that are forest get made into state parks. I don't think I was meant to spend more than a couple of days in the prairie at a time. Now it's time for the final state park in North Dakota, Fort Ransom. Is there a fort here? No. Or at least I couldn't find it, and I looked pretty far. Wouldn't you know, it has riparian forest and some hills. There's a covered wagon this time, though. There's some trails near the forest, and the North Country Scenic Trail passes through the park, which is apparently the longest scenic trail in the country. It's another park with horse support, and there was this farm that was in decent condition. I thought I might have accidentally left the park and crossed onto private property, but this was part of the park as well. For the final park, I hiked one last trail to give me a view of the whole area, and it was at least partially forested, but the mood was not great. Concluding thoughts in the moment, I did not get anything out of visiting the mall all in one go. They're all like riparian forest. They all feel very similar. It's usually just like a nice little patch of forest area surrounded by prairie. There's some hills. They could be big, they could be small. This park was a bit of a dud, and North Dakota had kind of broken me. It was quite hot out, especially for May. Every other park was swarming with ticks, including this one, but I had done it. I had visited every single state park in North Dakota. You think anyone else could have done this? A lesser man would have quit or been driven mad, but here I am. I did it. I visited all of the state parks in North Dakota, even though it was over 80 degrees in May and the trees didn't have leaves yet, and I was constantly covered in ticks, and it was poorly planned, my timing was off, none of the showers were working, so these parks are mostly empty because I have become this nasty, sweaty creature. Like, seriously, none of them had flowing water. I had to hose myself off those pumps for drinking water. You might say, oh, just get into like one of the lakes or the ponds, but you ever heard of swimmer's itch? I gotta get some non-lake water on me at some point. Let's get into the ranking. When ranking state parks, I like to sort them into tiers that are comparable with other states. I ask myself, just because these areas are unique for North Dakota, does that give them a higher standing on the tier list? No. Many might be distinct from the rest of the plains in North Dakota, but in any other state they'd be just kind of there. So the order they're in is compared to each other, but the tiers are comparable to other states. There aren't any in F tier, so starting out in D tier, in 14th place is Lewis and Clark. D tier parks I would say are lacking, and Lewis and Clark is lacking in scenery specifically. Like, yeah, it does have a lake and camping, but those are two things that are pretty common. So like, why should I go to this park specifically? There's not a lot. Now moving on to C tier, I would say C tier parks are middle of the road, and I think this describes most of the state parks in North Dakota, where they do have like a lot of the standard amenities. They've all got like camping, at least a little bit of hiking, probably a water feature, and then like day use. Nothing that really makes them stand out, especially in the scenery. So in 13th place is Lake Sakakawea. Got all the stuff, scenery ain't there though. In 12th is Beaver Lake. It's a bit prettier of a lake, but still not by much. In 11th is Cross Ranch, a little bit more hiking, and it does have water feature with the Missouri. In 10th is Graham's Island. It's got a nice little forest. Looking across is kind of cooler because you can see further into the distance. Yeah, still not great though. In 9th place is Fort Ransom. It's got hills and trails, but it is lacking a major water feature, which doesn't add a lot of points, but it does add some. In 8th is Turtle River. It's got some hills and a slightly larger river than Fort Ransom. In 7th is Fort Stevenson. It's got all the things, got a little bit of hiking, the reservoir, etc. The beach is kind of cool, and it's got a little fort, but you know, nothing that really makes it above and beyond. In 6th is Icelandic. Similar reasons as Fort Stevenson, but it has, you know, more going on with the buildings. Now we're getting into B tier. I think B tier is good, but not great, and has like one thing that kind of pushes them above C tier. In 5th is Pembina Gorge. I think it's barely in B tier. It's mostly here for its size, and it's just a large amount of trails. While it doesn't have camping, it's going to get some in the future. Should it be in C tier for now then? It's my list. It does have some of the nicest scenery in North Dakota, but that is still at B tier. In 4th place is Rough Rider. I debated where to put this one because while it does have some very unique scenery, especially for North Dakota, it is still kind of small. It does have camping, it does have the larger trail, which is nice, but only a small section of trail is actually in the park. Well, you know, it is an access point for a larger point of the trail. I don't know how much I should count it. Like, if it contained more of the trail, I think it could go into A tier, maybe, but for now, I think it's solidly B. In 3rd is Lake Metagoshi. It's got a lot of trails, it's got a few lakes that you can explore. Seems like a nice large area, and what I think really locks it in the B tier is the fact that you can see Canada from it. And you might think, how does that get it in the B tier? I say, because it's my list. And then in 2nd place is Fort Abraham Lincoln. I didn't think this one would be that high, but parks with unique features get pushed higher into the tier list, I'd say. And Fort Abraham Lincoln does have a lot going for it. It has, like, you know, all the standard stuff, you know, river feature, forest, hills, and campsite. But then also it has the fort structure, which is kind of neat, and also the On a Slant Village, which I think was the most interesting part of the park, because I haven't really seen anything like it, and of course, you know, wide sweeping views, even if they are just like of the plains. Then moving on to A tier, only one park here. In 1st place is Little Missouri State Park. That's right, it's my favorite state park in North Dakota, and I think it blows the rest out of the water. Even though it was infested with ticks, I think there's just so much scenery here. I'm a sucker for Badlands, and there's a lot of trails throughout. Now, there is one theoretical tier higher than this, and that is S tier. What's holding Little Missouri back from S tier is the fact that, well, the trails are poorly marked. I don't care that they're not the best maintained, but the fact that the map is just kind of wrong. Not a big fan of it, especially since a decent chunk of the park is actually located on private property. And it's the kind of place where it's like, you really want to know where the official trails are, because you don't want to wander off into an oil field, you know? And I think that holds it back from S, as well as, you know, the Badlands are cool, but I don't think they get pushed into that S tier. And that's the ranking. I set out hoping to show that North Dakota wasn't just an endless expanse of prairie. It's mostly that, but sometimes there's a riparian forest and a little bit of hills. I do regret coming a little too early in the year for trees to have gotten their leaves, but do I feel compelled to see the parks in a greener season? No, not really. I mean, there's a couple of them that I feel like I missed out, but yeah. I feel similar to how I did at Fort Ransom, where they all feel similar and I didn't get a lot from going to all of them. I wonder if any North Dakotans watch this, what their reaction would be. If it's like, oh man, you're really missing out, you gotta check it out when the leaves are on the trees. It's a whole different ball game. Or if they're like, why would you come to North Dakota? If you want more state park content, though, I've done this for a couple other states at this point, and this trip, I didn't just visit every state park in North Dakota. I also combined it with its southern counterpart, so stay tuned for South Dakota. Or maybe it's already out and you can go watch it. But that's all for now. Thanks for watching. I'd really appreciate it if you liked and subscribed, because I really like making these state park videos, despite what it may seem like with my grievances earlier. I did have fun on this trip. I do enjoy making these state park videos. I think they're a really fun way to explore states, and I would really like to visit the state parks in all 50 states at some point, so I'd appreciate any support on the video. Also, go follow the other Ocean Man social medias. I'll probably have some content related to this on those. Thanks for watching. This has been Goshen Man, the North Dakota State Parks.